Arun, that's quite an impressive introduction with a good lot of things, but I think the most nice thing about this is two things. Firstly, that you are now, the chief executive and the editor-in-chief of probably the most influential PR, certainly PR agencies organization in the world, in Provoke. But you started as a journalist, and not all PR people do. And I've always sort of seen you as someone who feels quite important about getting to the truth and making points that other people feel difficult to say. Would you think is that a fair comment?
I mean, I still see myself as a journalist, so I think that's probably fair. I think maybe that that kind of comes from that journalistic impulse. I'm not sure we are more focused on necessarily getting, more focused than anyone else on getting to the truth. But I do think that we've shown a willingness maybe to ask some hard questions about the PR industry, specifically on certain issues. And I guess that kind of is reflected in the fact that when we rebranded our business a few years ago, we chose the name Provoke because we felt it kind of encapsulated what we do. So, I mean, it's a very kind introduction. I hope I can live up to all of it. I feel the bar has been set very high, so let's see.
Well, don't worry, we're relaxed. You are among friends. You can say what you really think, and if you get somebody's name wrong, you won't be the first person today. So,
well, hopefully I won't get any agency names wrong. That would be unfortunate.
No, we'll be fine with that. But I want to say a couple of things that we try to be a bit provocative as well. You have a group of people in front of you who are independents. It's what they do. It's what makes them different from many of the corporate peers that they would compete with, and some of the corporates that they work with. There's been a lot of talk with all of us over the last several years about corporate purpose and the importance of being good citizens and doing the right thing and respecting diversity and equality and inclusion and all the good things that we can all agree with. But you also run an awards program, and awards programs have become, at least if you look at Cannes, a bit notorious for awarding things which are sometimes thought of as purpose washing. And there's one that I've blogged about, which I found is just a particularly egregious example, which is the campaign for Sheba cat food, where on some basic tenuous connection between cat food containing fish and fish coming from an ocean and oceans having coral reefs in them, they found a coral reef in Australia and inscribed the word hope on it and publicized this with a fair degree of success. Result of which was, of course, it attracted a lot of tourists who actually damaged the coral reef, and then the Australian people got a bit fed up with them. I mean, what do you look at purpose washing and think, that's an isolated example, Julian, you're being unfair, or I can think of several other examples?
Well, first of all, I want to say I'm really glad now that my cat refuses to eat Sheba cat food. Very fussy cat. I'm sure none of you have ever heard of that kind of thing. Is it an isolated example? No, unfortunately not. I think this whole idea of purpose washing or woke washing is kind of endemic at awards shows. And I don't want to single out Cannes necessarily, but I think because Cannes is the biggest awards show on the planet, it's particularly prevalent when you see it at Cannes. And I remember walking around Cannes, that floor where you can see all the work, and a few years ago, and thinking so many of these campaigns are really about social impact. They're addressing social issues. And you can see why those campaigns win, and we see that in our awards show at the Sabre Awards, because ultimately people working in these industries, judges who end up judging these awards, they want to feel good about the work that they're doing, the careers that they have, and so they end up being, I think, more biased towards selecting campaigns that do address social issues, have social impact. There's kind of a feel-good dividend creates good headlines, creates positive headlines. But it's very risky because everyone knows with these kinds of campaigns, there have to be receipts. And as in the example you mentioned, this is a campaign that perhaps ended up doing more environmental harm than good. Another great example of that is from a few years ago, the Fearless Girl campaign, which I'm sure many of you in this room are familiar with from State Street, where they changed the statue on Wall Street. They put a girl in front of the bull, and this was to, promote gender equality and raise awareness of issues around gender particularly I think in the financial services industry. And then it emerged, and that campaign won. It swept the board, I believe, at Cannes that year. And then it emerged that actually State Street was under a Department of Justice investigation because of the pay gap between men and women at its own company. And that's an investigation that they were ultimately forced to settle. So it's kind of rare to get such a beautiful example of woke washing. But you actually can see that time and time again with many of these big campaigns. There was another one at Cannes, can't remember the exact details, but it was about helping refugees in the Mediterranean. It was kind of an app, and then it emerged that actually there was very little substance to it, and it was classic kind of rhetoric over reality. So I think it's very risky when these campaigns are kind of put up on a pedestal. I don't think this is an argument against so-called purpose campaigns or against campaigns that aim for social impact or that address social issues. But it's an argument in favor of just common sense reminder of one of the fundamentals of public relations, which is that you can't say one thing and do another thing. That gap between rhetoric and reality will just end up tripping you up, whether you're Sheba cat food or State Street.
We talked about this talk with the title of "Can PR agencies make a difference?" And some of the people in the room are PR agencies specifically. Others are, everybody is a communications agency, and the gap between PR and paid and earned media is shrinking anyway. So I think this is a question for everybody here, really. But what is the role of the agency here? Are agencies doing enough to stop their clients making these mistakes? Or is it the agency's role really to say what the client wants to be said, unless it's like completely wrong? And who should be setting the agenda? And are agencies pitching themselves in the right way here?
Yeah, so this is a question that I think has kind of existed for as long as public relations has, which is the role of the agency should the agency be making these kinds of decisions in terms of the clients they work for and the work that they do? Or are they just there to do the client's bidding? And it was interesting, when you told me the name of this session, Can PR Agencies Make a Difference? My initial thought was, well, they can definitely make things worse, right? And we've actually seen that, we've seen that in many cases. A perfect example of that is, again, an example many of you will be familiar with is a PR agency called Bell Pottinger, very well known. One of the great things about Bell Pottinger, about talking about Bell Pottinger, is that because they don't exist anymore, I think we're reasonably safe from a libel perspective. But Bell Pottinger was accused of stoking up racial hatred in South Africa, and it was a crisis that ultimately engulfed the firm and forced it into administration. And now Bell Pottinger, one of the most storied PR firms in the history of PR, doesn't exist because they were a bad actor and they made things much worse. Now, what PR agencies will say is they may work for so-called unethical clients, controversial clients, whether it's in big oil, whether it's sugar, whether it's, I don't know, prisons. But their work is to mitigate a client's bad behavior. It's to steer a client in the right direction. It's to improve a client's behavior in line with the expectations of the client's stakeholders, which is, coming back to sort of the first principles of public relations. And I think that's fair. I think that's a fair position to take. The problem is, and coming back to when I said, PR agencies can make things worse, the problem is if we are to accept the argument that PR agencies can make things better, we need to see proof. And we don't see enough of that proof. And I don't think the industry does a good enough job at demonstrating how they've been able to steer a client in the right direction, how they've been able to move a big oil company towards renewables or towards a just transition, for example. And that then invites so many questions, so much scrutiny that we see, and so many attacks now. Just in the last 5 to 10 years, I feel it's really exploded. The scrutiny of PR firms, the clients they have, the work that they're doing. You look at Clean Creatives, for example, an organization that is its one goal is to stop agencies working with fossil fuel companies. And Clean Creatives will say, yes, agencies say that the work they're doing is helping these companies move away from fossil fuels. But we believe that actually what they're doing is providing cover for these companies to continue investing in fossil fuels. And there isn't enough proof to refute that allegation, unfortunately.
Could you give us an example of, we've talked a lot about negatives, a campaign or an action or an agency or a partnership with an agency and a client that's been positive, that strikes you as being, yes, they set out to really help and they did?
Yeah, sure. Probably the one I like to bring up is Dove and Ogilvy. The campaign for Real Beauty, as it started out, has it's almost 20 years now, I think. And it started with a very simple insight around representations of women in advertising, and that's kind of grown to encompass so many different executions and campaigns. It's still going. In one of the campaign that won our Asia Pacific Sabre Awards last year was Dove in Thailand, tackling the issue of mandated haircuts for schoolgirls. Schoolgirls in Thailand had to have their hair cut to a certain length, and this, it's completely in line with what Dove wants to accomplish. I think Ogilvy has been a prime actor in this campaign as well. So I think that's a really good example of a campaign that has done a lot of good, and just as importantly, is smart business. I think it's tempting sometimes to look at these campaigns and say, yeah, it did a lot of good, but is that somehow divorced from the business realities of what brands are trying to accomplish? And it shouldn't be really. These social impact campaigns, any campaigns, I think, that address social issues, it's rooted in smart business. Yeah. So that's one example. There's, we've seen many campaigns, for example, at the Sabres, that have changed laws. Those always do very well because it's a clear outcome. Judges love results like that. There was one last year in Honduras which changed the laws around access to the morning after pill. So that's a really good campaign. There have been several to remove taxes from tampons, sanitary products, different countries. So, these are just a few examples, I think, of where I think agencies have done really good work. But yeah, there are also, we just have to be cognizant that there are many, we need more of these examples, I think, I would say.
Do you think agencies should look at themselves in the same way? This question was provoked a little bit by the story in the press in the UK a couple of weeks ago about Fan Club. And Adrian Ma, who's the founder of Fan Club, was quoted as saying he had turned down assignments specifically from Saudi Arabia because Saudi Arabia doesn't tolerate gay people. He is a gay person, I believe, and he doesn't feel he should work for a company that is funded by a sovereign wealth fund of Saudi Arabia, irrespective of whether that issue is involved or not, because of what his agency stands for, it shouldn't have that engagement. I mean, is that a good example in your mind to the PR industry? Has it raised questions that you think maybe you should engage or rather than just disengage?
It's such a minefield nowadays. And I'm not sure I have all the answers on this because it really does feel like we're living through these issues, in real time, and my opinions change all the time. But I would say on that specific issue, I think any company has the right to choose who it works for, what clients it works for, and in particular in line with the values it holds. Fan Club PR, I don't know if it's a B Corp, but I suspect it's an agency. I mean, we know Fan Club a little bit. I think it's an agency that's very driven by its values, which I would imagine are kind of dearly held by the staff at this agency. And so I would think, and I can't speak for Adrian, but I would think it was a decision that reflected what the people at his agency wanted to do. And that's kind of an imperative for any business, really, I think, is to operate in line with the values that it holds. Now, would it have been better for Fan Club to take that work in the hope that engagement will somehow improve the situation in Saudi Arabia? Maybe, but I don't think you can blame them for not taking on that assignment. I think it's a question that many agencies are grappling with at the moment. A few years ago, most agencies I spoke to wouldn't take Saudi business. They were much more wary of it. Since then, Saudi spending on PR has increased at a much higher rate than spending on PR from other clients in other countries. And you could maybe say that for more pragmatic reasons, a lot of those agencies have reconsidered their stance on Saudi Arabia. And now, actually, it's very hard for me to think of any agencies that won't accept Saudi money. And I'm not making a judgment on this. We actually, Provoke, we have a client that is a Saudi agency as well. We looked at it long and hard. We looked at what the agency was trying to accomplish. In this case, it was to build communications capability amongst young Saudi executives. We felt that was in line with our values, and we felt we were okay to take that on. So it's a really complicated situation but I think, ultimately, the only thing any agency can do in this situation is make a decision based on whether the work that they're doing is in line with its values, whether it's ethical, obviously make sure they're not breaking any laws. And then, hope for the best and hope that you don't end up on the front page of BuzzFeed.
Well, that would be a media achievement, I guess. Or not?
Yeah, there are agencies that I don't think see it as necessarily a great thing.
You mentioned B Corps at one point, and we've got a presentation coming up about B Corps. So we won't go into too much detail about that. Fan Club is a B Corp, I understand, by the way. But do you think do you look at that and think, "Ooh, that's a B Corp, that's interesting, that gets me an extra point towards Agency of the Year"? Or do you think let everybody do their own thing?
Formula is secret, Julian.
Oh, nearly. I was trying to hard that.
No, because it's just a label. So, I mean, for me and for us, I think what's more important is the actual work that's being done. Now, being a B Corp is a label that should certify that an agency has met certain requirements in terms of its ESG commitments. So it's helpful, but I would still want to see more proof rather than just the B Corp label. And look, I'm not an expert on B Corps, but there was a great story in the FT a couple of months ago, something like the battle for the soul of B Corps, something like that. And I think what prompted it was that Nespresso had become a B Corp, which apparently enraged many other B Corps because of Nespresso's environmental record. And I think the argument was that the whole idea of B Corp certification should be about transformational good rather than just making companies less bad. But I think we're maybe veering into territory that will be taken by a later session. So agencies becoming B Corps, I think it's great for their own branding and I think it's great for their staff. But I'm always a little wary with these labels.
Well, we've tried hard to get you into trouble in this session so far,
but
we haven't got too far. Well, then I'm going to move the question to a more personal question in some ways. We haven't scripted this, by the way, but you spent a lot of your career in London. Mm-hmm. You chose to move to Hong Kong, and I think you're going to now move again to India. Mm-hmm. What made you want to go to Hong Kong? And did you, in hindsight, has that been helpful? Are you glad you went there? Do you feel it really taught you something useful? Do you feel it really helped achieve something? What's your kind of personal tally on, yeah, that was a great decision because X, or the other way around?
So you said you weren't going to ask me any questions that would get me arrested.
Well, it depends on your answer, of course. No, I don't mean a political question on the Chinese government. No, I do not.
So I didn't choose to go to Hong Kong, first of all.
Okay.
So my family moved to Hong Kong in 1980, and I have spent pretty much all of my life there, and I consider myself a Hong Konger. So I was in the UK. We moved to the UK for 6 years, and then moved back to Hong Kong in 2017. And yeah, since then, Hong Kong has been, not much has happened. It's been a pretty quiet period. I mean, us moving to India is kind of a reflection of many things. But certainly part of it is because a lot of people I know have left Hong Kong, and so it's become, for me, a bit more difficult living there. And I think it just provided an opportunity, perhaps, to look at living somewhere else. And I'm lucky enough that I can do my job pretty much anywhere. And India has become a really important market for us. But I will remain a Hong Konger. My parents still live there. My cat is going to still be there. So I mentioned my cat twice now. It's got to be a record. So it's not like it's not me turning, saying this is the end for me and Hong Kong. I think it's just the next stage. But I just think we're very lucky in that we've been able to live in Hong Kong and London and now in India and in 3 great cities.
Well, we've just heard a presentation from 2 amazing Indian ladies about
Indeed.
Positive and negative things in society. And for me, I just think I have more admiration for the way that Indian community uses the English language than anybody else. I was thinking, they said, oh, this gave us a chuckle. I thought, when did I last use the word chuckle? But it's so much a rich way of being, and I think you will have a great time living there, and I kind of envy you because it's such an energy.
Yeah, and actually, coming back to this session, I think a lot of the work we have seen out of India, interestingly enough, we've seen some really amazing social impact work out of India. And in fact, the work that 9 Yards just showcased, if you're asking me for examples of work that is both smart business and has huge social impact, that's a good example. There's an agency in India an independent agency that, you know, introduced period leave for its employees last year, which, you know, I've never seen that in other countries, right? So I think there's kind of an interesting consciousness, and we see that in a lot of the work that is coming out of the country.
Great. Well, enjoy when you get there. Thank you very much for coming and talking to us and
Thank you all.
sharing your thoughts. And